As we all go about our daily roles in business, setting strategy, bringing our people along with us, we're often called upon to make tough calls. Needless to say, the business landscape in the broader global context doesn't always play along with our well-laid plans. And here at We Are Unity, we help our clients realise their full potential through their people. We specialise in the science of workforce productivity, and as a result, we get exposure to some of the biggest and brightest businesses across Asia Pacific. And if the current state of the business world has taught us anything, it's taught us that resilience is the essential trait that will get us through as individuals, organisations, and as a broader community. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest. He's a man made of empathy and integrity. He's a powerful galvanising effect on the people who work with him and for him. And he's surrounded by politics and pressure. He stands firm against the popular tide and always tells it like it is, even if that's not what the powers that be want to hear. He's the man who led Australia through our worst bushfire season ever, in charge of over 70,000 volunteer firefighters, all of whom he regards as family. As we all face the reality of constant uncertainty, change, and I'd like to think opportunity, we need to be building a discipline of resilience into our businesses and lives. Today, Shane will talk to us about leadership, resilience, navigating a crisis, and hopefully tell us some stories about the many catalysts that have shaped him to get him to where he is today. So please join me in welcoming New South Wales Commissioner of Resilience, Shane Fitzsimmons.
It's indicative of volatile, dynamic, changing fire grounds, and people need to remain alert, be ready to act.
It was a black summer, and he provided a calmness to a world that was burning.
I'm certainly not comfortable with any hero tag or anything like that. I have been absolutely in awe of the collective effort of everyone that came together this fire season. Look, there's no doubt through high school, yes, I was mischievous, I was rebellious. There was a lot of mentoring. There was people to give you a clip around the ears when you were being a bit too cheeky or doing the wrong thing. But you were also empowered with some really serious and important things to do and to deliver on. I'm confident that I'm better for it. Otherwise, I could have certainly gone down a different path and ended up right off the rails. Very dangerous and volatile situation already down the south coast of New South Wales, and we're expecting that to increase as we see.
For someone who's so decisive and demonstrated such leadership, he's also incredibly compassionate, and that's why he has such a loyal following amongst the RFS volunteers.
Well done. Shane, really thinks of all the people within the Rural Fire Service as family. I think it comes through pretty strong. He wants to see everyone get home.
I could have rationalised all sorts of reasons why I wanted to stay, and I love the organisation, I love the people dearly. But it was also, without a doubt, the hardest decision to make, because the organisation's been a massive part of my life over 35 years.
Jeez, what a roller coaster. And you've clearly lived a full life, and I think there are clearly a lot of questions coming through. We're just looking at the it's incredible the learnings that we're able to gather from this, and I think from your own family through to the fires, through to fraud, just incredible the breadth of what you've had to deal with and endure yourself. So thank you for sharing, and also just before we get into questions, thank you for everything you've clearly done, for the state and the country. Now, I'm going to get straight into questions if that's okay. Now, one of the first questions that we've got that's come through here is around the crisis mindset. So a lot of corporations are clearly seeing some good behaviors coming through in a crisis. You know, people being less defensive, less territorial, more open-minded, more sharing, etc. How do you sustain a crisis mindset when there is no crisis? So once COVID's gone, how do you sustain a crisis mindset?
That's a really good question, and I'll answer it this way, and hopefully it does answer the question. I think what crisis mindset and crisis leadership really does is amplify or magnify, depending on how you want to view the lens, the underlying leadership qualities and behaviours and culture of an individual, of an organisation, of a community. The biggest way to sustain that crisis, and so if the underlying culture or traits are poor, then I think that's what gets highlighted in crisis or crisis leadership or crisis events. But if the foundations are good, then I think that shines through in crisis, in leadership, in adaptation, in sincerity about trying to connect. And as we're doing at the moment with people working remotely and so many change practices, there's an underlying sincerity of everyone buying into this to look out for each other. I think the way to sustain the good in what we're experiencing at the moment is to genuinely capture the learnings, the lessons as we go, not waiting till after the event where reflection and hindsight is often clouded by the reality of what unfolded over the time. So capturing the lessons, capturing the experiences, and as someone who's grown up in the fire and emergency services, after every event that we have, we do what we call debriefs or after action reviews, where we sit down and we ask everybody to contribute at whatever level they are, because we've all got different perspectives, what worked well and what didn't work well. We tend to, as a culture, default to what didn't work well to see how we can improve that. But that's a little bit of a failing. It's a good thing to capture that, but what we've got to do is get both sides of the ledger right. We need to have on one side what actually worked well and ask ourselves, why do we think that worked well? And then share that, grow that, hold that going forward. At the same time, pick up the big list of things that didn't work well and ask ourselves, why didn't that work well? And what can we do now to improve on that situation, build on what worked well, and prepare ourselves for the next crisis, the next disruption, because they will come. And through that open, transparent, shared learning experience, translate that into strategies, into investments, into new ways of doing things. That's what helps us build, I think, the momentum and the preparation for the next cycle of challenge and disruption.
It's I think, you know, Shane, based on that, capturing the learnings is probably going to be one of the most critical components, particularly when we look at the increase in trust, transparency, and the connectedness of leaders through this time. You know, why the big difference, and how do we ensure that we keep that? One of the questions that's come through is what tools or practices do you personally use to manage your own emotions?
I've been asked this a lot, and I don't really know the answer to this question. But I think the way I do answer it is, I know in my own makeup, I'm deep down a very emotional person. I'm one of these hopeless people that tears up in movies, that tears up in, you know, TV programs. They put me, you know, I'm hopeless with that sort of, because I do get very emotionally connected and concerned with what's happening in people's lives, and when I see particularly loss, or I see things that aren't right, it affects me very much. But what I do find is, no matter how much of a bad day I'm having, I do reflect and I think of others, and there is always somebody worse off. There is always somebody. And I try to maintain perspective with everything. I don't try to dismiss the challenges that I might be experiencing personally, and I don't try to bottle them up and tuck them away. Somehow I just try to accept them and satisfy myself that I'm trying to do the very best I can. I reach out for support where I need to. I've got good trusted peers.
I've got an extraordinary, caring and supporting family, loving family. And I know when I walk in the door at home, no matter the responsibility I've had on that day, I'm in charge of nothing. I can't, don't you walk in this household and think you're going to start telling us how we're going to do things. As I've said very publicly before, the only thing I've got responsibility for when I get home is stacking the dishwasher. And that's only because I get frustrated with the way everybody else does it. So grounding and reality for me is really, really important. And I've always tried to learn from others. So we always talk about mentors. I think learning from others about what you want to emulate, what you admire and seek to emulate is really important. But I think the same thing is to look at others and say, geez, I hope I never look like that, and do your very best to avoid what you see as inappropriate, awful, disgraceful sort of leadership traits and behaviours, and understanding that whatever we're doing, we genuinely aren't alone. We're all in this together, and we are. And when you start having a conversation about how you're feeling or what's troubling you, or whether it's society generally, something at home, there is actually some unity. There is actually some affinity with others that pulls a connection together. So for me, people have always said I'm a pretty open book. I'd be a hopeless poker player. I can't really, I say it how it is. My views and my expressions are usually pretty candid, and I don't give too much away. What you see is what you get. They always said I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'm always open with my views or inclusion into whatever discussion's going on. So bouncing off others and working with others and knowing it's not just about you, and there are people worse off than you, and having a good support network for me is really important.
The level of EQ and clearly AQ that you have is quite unique and clearly something that's been built over time through the full life that you've led. You talked about care. How do you teach people to think about care, to understand care the way that you do?
I think, well, it's interesting, I'll share with you a little anecdote. When my daughters were little, we had this book, and it was a book called Who Sank the Boat? And it was written by Pam Allen. And it's a little book where there's this menagerie of animals, and it's a cow, a donkey, a sheep, and a pig, I think it is, and a mouse. And they've all got to get in this rowboat, and they've got to go across the lake and get to the other side. They've got to go off a wharf and get into this rowboat. I think the book's designed to help kids understand volume and mass and all that sort of thing. But for me, I've used it as a book around leadership and care and attention that matters. And the book about Who Sank the Boat talks about all these animals getting in the boat, and each time an animal gets in the boat, it gets lower in the water, and the water gets closer to the lip of the edge of the rowboat, right? And then after every animal gets in the boat, the question is, do you know who sank the boat? I've read this book so many times to my kids. But so that the donkey gets in, the cow gets in, but eventually it's and the donkey and the cow and everyone gets in carefully. But then the mouse jumps in and actually topples the whole boat over, right? So my leadership lesson is never underestimate the importance of the little things when it comes to others and your team. So for me, I've always tried to understand what makes people tick, what they do at home, what they do in their private life, what their backgrounds are they okay, are they traveling okay, how are their partners going, how are their kids going, how are their pets going, whatever it is. I've always tried to get to understand what matters to people, because then the little things that you pay attention to help people connect, and try to remember those conversations. Next time you see to them, catch up with them. And we know, and particularly with volunteers, motivation, inclusion, commitment is got little to do with remuneration, and we know that in the paid environment as well. Remuneration is one of the least motivating, satisfying things in the work. Don't get me wrong, there's a satisfaction level with it, but the things that matter are recognition, praise, acknowledgement, interest. So if leaders are genuinely connecting with people and talking with their teams, that's where I think care comes through. And at a level, when things go wrong, leaders need to be present. When all the celebrations are going on, you really don't need the leader present. You let everyone else get on with that and relish in the victories and relish in the celebrations. But when things are bad, leaders need to stand up. They need to back their team in for the very best they did. And through the fire season, for example, things went wrong, but I backed the team in because they did it with the very best of intentions, the very best of analysis, and the very best execution they possibly could. But when you're dealing with Mother Nature, when you're dealing with variables that you can't always control, inherent risk factor in that decision-making process is it might not always go to plan. So being present is really important. I've always sought to be. The old rule is, and I don't know where it came from, but I've genuinely believed it. For leaders, funerals are a must, weddings not so. And I can't tell you how many weddings and christenings and other things I've been invited to over the years by my teams, and I've always declined them because I don't want to compromise the team or myself in that regard. But when a funeral happens, when something happens in the workplace or someone in the workplace loses someone very dear to them, I'll try my damnedest to be at that funeral along with others to show that we support and care. So it's actually about how we behave, how we interact. And the old "Are you okay" strategy, particularly in the fire and emergency services, promoting that, owning that, pushing that, and sharing with your teams that you too struggle with hardship, you too struggle with adversity. I used to really struggle with the fact that, you know, as a bloke growing up, we were always told not to share our emotions or show our ideas. But the reality is we are human. And when things go really wrong, it's okay to be human and be able to express that and relate to that, because I think it's a signal that you genuinely care. And so to me, it's actually about leading by example and knowing that the little things matter, paying attention to things and following up those conversations. And if you ask someone, "Are you okay?" pausing and waiting for the response and hearing the response is really important. Don't just listen to it, hear it and understand it and follow up. That's where the care factor comes through for me, is that you're not tokenistic with your narrative. Don't get me wrong, we always say g'day, how you traveling, we walk past, but when you are in that conversation, be sincere about it.
I think what I'm hearing is be present.
Absolutely.
And love the story. I'll have to buy that one with the animals in the boat. What a mouse!
Yeah.
But now, one of the themes that's clearly coming through is about crucial conversations, critical conversations, and we know that a lot of large corporates in this country struggle from cultures of nice, cultures that prioritise personal relationships over the interests of the business, and where critical conversations are avoided. What advice do you have for organisations who are trying to help their leaders be more open to critical conversations, be more inviting of feedback?
That's a very good question. And my simple answer is accept the fact that you can't please all of the people all of the time. That is just a reality. And I've got to tell you, there are some people out. I jokingly used to say management and leadership is easy. Anyone can study it. You know, we can all get PhDs in it. We can all do formal training in it. Leadership and management only becomes a challenge when you add in people, because we're all a bit weird, we're all a bit odd, and we don't all follow the rule book in terms of how we behave and how we act and all that sort of thing. But if we accept the fact that there are some people, no matter what you do for them, no matter how good the circumstances are, they will just be the black hat on everything. They will just see the glass as half empty, there's no way out. But you've got to park that. You can't pander all the time to the lowest common denominator. You can't ignore that. But you've got to socialise it. So as a volunteer organisation, critically, the one thing we committed to was policy formulation, policy review. We were very open about developing drafts, arguing why it was important, why strategy was important, why a change in this was important, why adjusting this was important. And we socialised the draft documents for 2 or 3 months before we landed to ensure that we got all the feedback we could. And then we used that feedback and we published the way we do business around here, architecture of policy and standards and those sorts of things. Now, there were still people that weren't happy with that, but we had confidence that we'd heard, we'd listened, we genuinely consulted with the workforce to ensure that we were capturing the best possible alignment with the members that we could. And the other thing that was important was the policy we had at a corporate level had to be, and policy is only as good as its applicability locally. So there's no point having a state policy or a central policy if it doesn't relate or translate to applicability at the front line or the local level. The other thing that was really important that we embarked on, particularly in my 12 years as commissioner, was a dramatic shift in culture. And what I mean by that was we actually established values and behaviours, and we weren't asking people to be, patron saints or anything like that. They were pretty simple. It was around teamwork, mutual respect, all those sorts of things. And we then said, we want acceptable behaviours in the workplace, and most importantly, we are not going to tolerate unacceptable behaviour. And we had to embark on a program of shifting the culture. And we borrowed the General Morrison quote, who was dealing with some ADF challenges at the time around inappropriate behaviour. And the quote went to the words of the effect of, the standard you walk past is the standard that you accept. And it's particularly the case for leaders in uniformed or paramilitary type organisations where there is a clear line of command and control. So if your leaders in a uniform sense are letting comments, behaviour, poor taste jokes, disrespectful narrative, sexist commentary, all those sorts of things, if no one's arresting that, if no one's correcting that, then you're not going to shift the culture. So getting that buy-in, the membership wants to know that you're serious about culture change. You're not tokenistic. You're not just jumping on the latest populist trend, that you're doing this because you genuinely want to shape your organisation as an organisation of choice, an organisation that values difference of opinion, difference of background, diversity, all those sorts of things. And you've got to open the door to feedback and guidance on your policy constructs, on the way you do business in that organisation, and then using that feedback, demonstrate how that's been reflected in policy adjustments or changes. The organisation will also accept, in my experience, when management needs to make urgent changes to policy and standards and practice because an event's happened or a regulatory change or like a safety or health or accident sort of thing. So, but generally speaking, most other doctrine, most other rules of how we operate around here should be done through considered collaboration and renewed and reviewed over periods of time, 3 to 5 years, depending on what your cycle is in an organisation. But knowing that they can give that candid feedback and that it will be included in the consideration of review or renewal is really, really important.
There's clearly a lot to be learned from that level of transparency and equally, psychological safety. Now, a lot of the questions that are coming through are focused on decision making, and the general sort of theme that's coming through on these questions is, what are the key elements that you use in your decision making? Is there a structure? Is there a process? Can you just give us a little bit more of a tangible insight into how you make decisions in a crisis?
So look, and that's a good one. So I think the first thing we need to do when it comes to decision is know why we're making a decision. So what's the goal? What's the objective? What's the task at hand? In a crisis environment, you've got really truncated time pressures. You've got not the luxury you would normally have of soliciting advice, reference points, material, those sorts of things. But whether it's a crisis event or whether it's BAU, strategy, contemplation, surrounding yourself with the most competent and skilled people you can and the latest insightful information that you can gather is really, really important. Understanding the goal or the end game is really important. And then what we call a risk analysis or a scenario contemplation, the what if question. So if we do this, what are the risks? What are the consequences? What are the benefits? And then ultimately weighing that up and working out the best strategy given the circumstances going forward is really important. So decision making in isolation is invariably poor outcome. So the more you collaborate on the issues as appropriate, the better and more likely you've got of getting a considered beneficial outcome for you, your agency, your team, whatever it is you're seeking to make that decision on. That gets really pressured in crisis events when time is absolutely of the essence. What I would also say is don't let analysis become paralysis. Don't let the pursuit of ultimate perfection result in no progress. So at least make decisions that incrementally go forward. Because as I say, going back to that beginning, one of the single biggest things that really frustrate people in the workplace, in volunteer organisations, is indecision and inaction. They'd rather have decisions and explanations on those decisions and why we're reaching those decisions than no decisions at all, particularly when they don't agree with them. They're happier with decisions they don't agree with if we explain ourselves properly than no one making a decision at all. It stymies so much. And indecision or not dealing with poor attitude, there's another analogy I like to use, Ben. It's a bit like the flat tire. So sometimes when it comes to making decisions or taking action against poor behaviour or poor attitude or whatever, it's a bit like the flat tire analogy. Sometimes we just need to pump it up. It's a really easy decision. It's a really easy intervention. It's a really simple action. You pump up the tire and it goes on fine. Sometimes you might need to be a little bit more interventionist. You might need to be a little bit more intrusive. You might need to do a puncture repair, fix the tire up a little bit, but then reinflate it and move on. But sometimes we've also got to realise in ourselves that the tire's stuffed, and it's about time we got rid of it and replaced it. Now, whether that's the person, whether that's the strategy, whether that's the decision being contemplated, you've got to make a decision. At what point is this tire no longer any good and beyond repair and modification, and it's time to turf it out and get a new one? And the reason I like the tire analogy is because you can step your way through levels of intervention, but it also goes to the core of what happens a lot in teams, in small teams, in organisations, in sections and directorates. And that is, if that tire is sitting on the vehicle, on the car, the bus, whatever it is, that's carrying your team, then until you actually do something about that flat tire, you're not only stopping the wheel from turning, you're stopping the whole team from going forward. So again, it probably gets back to that, the little things matter thing, but the tire analogy around decision making and taking action is really, really important. And then if we think our decisions through and we think our actions through, there's another great analogy or simple tool that I would encourage people to play out on a piece of paper in their own organisation or their circumstances. And it's how do we buy in the leadership commitment to decisions, to strategies, to actions at all levels of the organisation. And what I would say to you is this: imagine your organisation chart and the different layers of management, and talk about leadership commitment and influence. So if you start at the senior executive team and you've got 4 or 5 people, and you've got the majority of those teams that buy into the strategy and positively influence their people, if 95% do it at the top level, and then that 95% continues to influence on the way down, but for every 5% that don't, there's a cascading effect. What the modelling shows is that if you've got 95% of leadership commitment across your organisation, by the time you reach out to your workforce, you're probably going to get a 78% commitment and influence effective rate. But if you drop that 50%, if you drop that 95% commitment down to 50% commitment at all your management levels, then that rapidly dissipates to about 4% reach and influence across the organisation. So decision-making, socialising contemplation, socialising the options and why we've landed where we are, helps buy in commitment and influence to implementing those decisions and those actions and those strategies. And if you don't have the buy-in at the levels, there's this exponential growth in dissipating return down the management line, if that makes sense. I've probably explained that clumsily, but
not at all. Makes absolute sense, Shane, and I think really really practical in terms of where to focus. One of the things that you've referenced quite a few times, and that's coming up in the Q&A, is around collaboration and culture. And a lot of organisations strive for collaboration, but clearly struggle because they have consensus cultures. So I guess that's politics and hierarchy and all the other things sort of getting in the way, and CEOs complaining about too many meetings for meeting's sake and not enough decisions actually getting made, which is clearly slowing down the pace of organisations' progress and innovation, etc. So in terms of shifting from a consensus culture to a truly collaborative, decisive culture, what are the key steps that a CEO really needs to think about?
Speaking from a volunteer background, consultation, collaboration is the glue that holds the organisation together. So if they don't feel they're being consulted, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty out there that don't, but when you've got an organisation of 73,000 people, I can guarantee you that whatever we do, if we were giving milkshakes to everybody, there'd be people out there that would complain they were lactose intolerant. So why would you do this to us? And it's a legitimate thing. So, and I'm not dismissing those that are lactose intolerant, because my daughter's one of them. But what I'm saying is, you are never going to please all of the people all of the time. But through a culture of genuine and sincere collaboration and consultation, as much as you pragmatically can, the things that are important, people will accept truncated time periods, limited exposure, limited collaboration. The one thing we did a lot in the volunteer organisation is we have reference groups, meeting groups, representative bodies that actually help with pulling the information together, feeding information out, representing views. You can't get to 70,000 people all of the time. But what you can do is email them. What you can do is provide internet portals or intranet portals where you say, we're working on this draft document. These are the reasons we're working on it. Here's a draft template. Can we get feedback from people on how they think this is going, blah, blah, blah. That's part of the process. Now, you might not punch out your document in 2 weeks' time. It might take you 2 months. And an organisation like the RFS, which is highly decentralised across New South Wales, we board ourselves, as a general rule, a minimum 3-month consultation on draft documentation or draft policy positions and that sort of thing, to try and buy in as much consultation as we can. So it is tough, but it is necessary. And if we want to try and get our people on board, then we've got to open this door to consultation. I do remember one time I went to an office, though, and someone complained that we pushed documentation out, and they were sick of it because, all we get is new updates, and we never know why it's coming. And I said, but hold on a minute. Those documents that you're talking about, we put them out for 3 months consultation. And they said, I haven't got time to bloody look at all that and give you feedback on that. And I said, well, okay. I said, well, if you're not willing to give us feedback on it, but now you're complaining to me because we're putting it out and you haven't had a say on it. I said, what's my answer to that? What answer can you give me to do that? So the answer is, you're never going to please everybody all of the time, but you've just got to try your damnedest to do so.
No, that's great. And I think that structure of consultation, so giving people the opportunity to provide feedback as opposed to just having lots of meetings and lots of debate is a good distinction. We're out of time. There's one final question, which is, Shane, what is your first challenge going to be in your new role as the New South Wales Commissioner of Resilience?
The new challenges are multifaceted. As the Premier and the head of the Public Service said to me, the 3 biggest priorities are recovery, recovery, recovery. And that's absolutely the big focus, particularly out of drought, bushfire, floods and COVID. There's lots of physical rebuilding and mending and reconstructing going on, but there's an enormous amount of emotional and psychological repair, rebuilding and healing that's going on. The human toll, for every statistic around a building, there's people, there's individuals, there's families, there's business, there's community. So recovery is massive. I've got a great team here, but we're going to reorganise ourselves and rebuild ourselves and reprofile ourselves in this new organisation and this new arrangement. There's also a broader remit. When I first accepted this job, bushfire was absolutely the focus. COVID is now our big focus. but so too are big things like cybersecurity, and starting to plan and contemplate the next season, which is only months away, and how do we start working across community to start looking at resilience planning more broadly throughout community. Some good examples from Greater Sydney area with councils and local community groups, but how do we take that across the state? So recovery is a big focus. These other challenges around COVID and cyber and all manner of other things, a great team, building a new team, a new agency, working out our stakeholders, working out our remit, but also starting to look ahead, planning and preparing and helping to build resilience at an individual level, community level, industry and business sector, and right across government. So it's a pretty broad remit, but something I'm really looking forward to, and that I think will make a genuine and positive difference to the people of New South Wales.
Shane, just a small to-do list there for you. We certainly wish you and the team all the best of luck. And I want to say thank you for taking the time today to share your learnings, your journey, your insights with our client community. It's certainly appreciated. And thank you again for your candor and directness to really help us understand so we can all benefit and learn, both in business but equally in our own lives. So thank you again. And to everybody who's tuned in, I hope you've enjoyed today and seen value in what Shane's kindly shared with us. Apologies for the audio issue in the video. We will be sharing the link to that video to everybody who tuned in today, so you can watch and enjoy it then. And Shane, all the best. Thanks again. And
thanks, Ben. I really appreciate coming on board, and I hope that's been of benefit to you and the team. Really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Shane. Take care.